I won millions in the lottery, but no one knew it except me. The secret felt like both armor and a ticking bomb, shielding me from my family's greed while pressing against my chest like it might explode at any second. My name is Haley, and for 32 years I have been the forgotten daughter, the family ATM, the one they all turn to when their own choices caught up with them. I was the one who dipped into savings so Tyler could pay his rent, or who maxed out a credit card to make sure Madison's wedding had the flowers she wanted. But when it was my turn to need help, I learned the truth about what family really meant. Before I continue narrating the story of Haley, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. The story didn't begin with luck, but with exhaustion. I was standing in my apartment kitchen, staring into a fridge that hummed louder than it kept things cold, debating whether stale bread counted as dinner. My birthday had come and gone without much more than a balloon emoji from my mother, while Madison sent updates about marble backsplash options for her kitchen remodel. I'd worked 60 hours that week, only to watch my boss Sandra present my ideas as her own again. Somewhere between the unpaid loans to my siblings and the silence on my birthday, something inside me snapped. I bought the lottery ticket on a whim at Murphy's Corner store, the only place in my neighborhood where the owner still called me sweetheart. Mr. Murphy remembered my birthday, even though my family didn't, and when I asked for a ticket that night, it felt like reclaiming something small but mine. I chose my numbers carefully: dates of broken promises, missed graduations, debts never paid. Each number marked a scar carved by the people who were supposed to love me most. That $2 piece of paper went into my wallet without a second thought, tucked between expired coupons and my maxed-out credit card. When I finally checked the numbers days later, I nearly fainted. One by one, they matched. The kind of match that changes your life, not just your mood. $12 million. Enough to rewrite everything I thought was permanent. My knees buckled, my stomach lurched, and I vomited in disbelief before checking the numbers again 14 times. I whispered them out loud until they sounded foreign, like someone else's blessing had fallen into my hands. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, terror replaced wonder. Stories of lottery winners losing everything played on loop in my head. Tales of families suing each other, of children turning on parents, of greed disguised as love. If my family discovered I had this money, I knew what would happen. Madison would want vacations. Tyler would invent emergencies. My parents would suddenly remember my birthday again. I couldn't let them know, not yet, not until I saw them clearly, stripped of pretense. That's when the idea came. I would test them. I met with a lawyer first, because survival demanded strategy. James Whitmore, calm and silver-haired, listened without judgment as I placed the ticket on his desk. Within hours, he helped me establish a trust, an invisible shield called New Beginnings LLC that would hold the winnings. Taxes, investments, anonymity, all arranged with precision I never thought I'd need. When I left his office, I was $7 million richer after taxes, yet still the same Haley my family dismissed. The secret burned in my chest, heavy but powerful. To the outside world, I was still broke. My apartment still smelled faintly of mold, and my shoes still carried the scuffs of too many winters. I ate peanut butter sandwiches at my desk, while coworkers groaned about gas prices, nodding along even as I knew I could buy 10 cars without blinking. When my boss stole my work again, I smiled because her victory no longer mattered to me. I was quietly, invisibly free, though no one else knew it. And with that freedom came the resolve to test everyone who had once leaned on me. The plan was simple but ruthless. I would tell them I lost my job and needed help. $3,000. Not much compared to what I had given them over the years. I practiced the story until I could cry on command, weaving just enough detail to sound believable. I studied old headlines about company closures and memorized phrases like frozen assets and embezzlement scandal. If they loved me, they would help me when I supposedly had nothing. The first call was to my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, distracted by the television blaring in the background. I told her my story, my voice breaking just enough to sound convincing. She gasped at first, then hesitated, her concern evaporating into excuses. "$3,000 is a lot, Haley," she said, before suggesting food banks and church charities. Food banks. From a woman who had spent $4,000 on a handbag just months earlier. My stomach twisted as she redirected me toward strangers rather than offering even a fraction of what I had given her. She promised to think about it, but we both knew that meant no. I thanked her anyway, hanging up with a polite voice while my hands trembled with rage. It was only the beginning, and already my heart was breaking. Next came my father, who agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. He arrived with a stack of job listings, sliding them across the table as though I hadn't been working tirelessly for years. For 45 minutes, he lectured about bootstraps, roommates, and financial responsibility. When I finally asked for money, he shifted uncomfortably, insisting that this was a, quote, learning opportunity. He patted my hand, called it character building, and left without offering a single dollar. Madison's response came through a video call, her blonde hair gleaming under perfect salon lighting, AirPods in her ears as she waved at me from her Tesla. At first, she seemed shocked and concerned, but her tone shifted the moment I mentioned needing money. "$3,000? Wow, that's a lot," she said, before reminding me about her renovation budget. She suggested I move back in with Mom or rent out my apartment through an app. Then she ended the call with a fake smile, promising to circle back. Tyler didn't even pick up. 6 calls, all ignored, followed by a text from his girlfriend Emma that gutted me. She said Tyler thought I was being dramatic, that I had a victim complex and was always looking for attention. I stared at the words, my vision blurring with fury and disbelief. This was the same brother I had saved from eviction more times than I could count. That night, his Instagram showed him at a steakhouse, laughing in sneakers that cost more than my rent. I documented every rejection in a notebook, each excuse recorded like evidence in a trial. My family had drained me for years, borrowing nearly $30,000 in total. But when I asked for just $3,000 back, they acted like I was a burden. I reread the notes late into the night, the pages filling with rage and clarity. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. The only one I hadn't tested was Aunt Deborah. She called me first, her voice heavy with concern, asking if I was okay. Not if I had money, not if I could fix myself, but if I was okay. She insisted we meet at Betty's diner, showing up in her worn coat with a bag of homemade soup and an envelope she pressed into my hand. Inside was $2,000, carefully saved, bills worn from being counted. My throat closed as I realized she had sacrificed her own health to give me what she could. That was the moment everything changed. Here was a woman who cut her medication in half to make her savings stretch, yet she was the only one who cared if I was eating. Deborah's loyalty pierced me more deeply than my family's betrayal ever had. Sitting in that diner, I realized she was my true family, the one who passed a test she didn't even know she was taking, and for the first time, I considered telling her my secret. Deborah's envelope sat on the table between us, heavier than any briefcase of cash could ever be. My fingers trembled as I tried to hand it back, insisting she needed it more than I did, but she refused, pushing it toward me with quiet determination, telling me she would manage just fine. Her tired eyes and missing coat buttons told another story, one of years spent sacrificing quietly. My chest ached with guilt, knowing I had millions hidden away while she cut her pills in half to save me. The weight of my secret pressed harder in that booth than it ever had before. I watched her stir sugar into her coffee, calm, as if giving away her last savings was no tragedy at all. She asked careful questions about whether I had heat, whether I was eating, whether the landlord had given me trouble. No one else had asked those questions, not once, not ever. My family only measured me in terms of what I could give them, but Deborah measured me in terms of survival. When she spoke of Robert, her ex-husband, I felt the air shift. She told me about the inheritance her grandmother had left her, and how Robert had stolen every penny by forging her signature. It was the first time I'd heard the truth behind their divorce, and her words hit me like a prophecy. "Money doesn't change people, Haley," she said. "It only reveals who they already are." Her story unraveled the last of my defenses. I couldn't bear her thinking I was poor when I had the means to save her. The lie tasted bitter, and my secret screamed to be released. My voice broke as I admitted the truth. I hadn't lost my job at all. I had won $12 million in the lottery, and I had been testing everyone to see who would stand by me. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, but Deborah didn't flinch. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes steady, her fingers curling gently around her coffee cup. Then she nodded, slowly, as if it all made sense now. "You tested them," she said softly, "and I was the only one who passed." Tears blurred my vision as I begged her forgiveness for deceiving her. She shook her head, insisting I had nothing to apologize for. She told me she had made her choice freely, because family meant showing up when no one else would, that money in the envelope wasn't about dollars. It was about loyalty, and no amount of millions could buy what she had given me in that diner. For the first time since winning, I felt both unburdened and terrified. Deborah knew my truth now, the truth my siblings would have weaponized against me. But instead of greed, she offered compassion. Instead of demands, she gave advice. Keep the secret and use the money wisely. She reminded me that my family had already revealed themselves when they thought I was powerless. The reckoning couldn't be postponed any longer. I had arranged a family meeting at my apartment, telling them it was about my situation. My heart pounded as I cleaned my tiny space, taping evidence to the walls like a prosecutor, preparing for trial. Folders labeled with each sibling's name lay on my coffee table, filled with records of loans, excuses, and betrayals. The speech I'd practiced stared back at me from the table, sharp as a blade. They arrived like actors walking into a courtroom, each playing their part. Madison clutched her designer purse and wrinkled her nose at my furniture. Richard muttered about missing golf while Mom fluttered around him, feigning stress. Dad took the armchair like a judge, papers in hand as though still lecturing. Tyler stumbled in late, reeking of alcohol and excuses. Only Deborah entered with warmth, carrying a tin of cookies and hugging me tightly. Her presence grounded me, her quiet strength a shield against the storm gathering in my living room. I looked at their faces. Skeptical, impatient, expectant. They weren't here out of love but curiosity, maybe even obligation. They thought they were about to watch me beg again. Instead, I stood tall and announced my new role as executive director of a nonprofit foundation. Their relief was instant, like a pressure valve releasing. Mom smiled in triumph. Richard tucked away his phone. Madison even clapped. They congratulated me, pretending they'd been worried, pretending they cared. And then I revealed their failures one by one. "Mom, when I begged you for help, you told me to try food banks," I said, voice steady. "Dad, you spent 45 minutes lecturing me on responsibility and offered nothing." "Madison, you cried over marble while I begged for rent." "Tyler, you told Emma I was just being dramatic." Their eyes widened, the room shrinking around them as my words hit harder than fists. The silence afterward was suffocating, but I refused to let them squirm free. I reminded them of every dollar I had given them over the years, over $23,000 in total. I listed the times they had forgotten me, my birthday, my graduation, my moments of need. Their faces grew pale as I turned to Deborah and told them how she had cut her medication in half to give me money. For once, they were speechless, forced to sit with their shame. Richard broke first, snapping that I was unfair and ungrateful. Mom defended him, insisting I didn't understand, quote, adult responsibilities. Madison fumbled excuses, saying Derek handled the finances, while Tyler just stared at the floor. Their excuses sounded thin, brittle, already crumbling. I didn't raise my voice, but every word sliced through their defenses. Deborah stood by me, her voice trembling but strong. She told them I had carried them for years, and when I finally needed carrying, they let me fall. The truth silenced even Richard, whose bluster withered under her gaze. One by one they left, muttering, grasping for dignity that wasn't there. Only Deborah remained, holding my hand as the door closed behind them. That night, my apartment felt both empty and full. Empty of their poisonous presence, full of Deborah's quiet loyalty. I lay awake, staring at the laminated lottery ticket hidden in my jewelry box. Those numbers had given me money, but Deborah had given me clarity. Blood made me related, but choice made me family. In the weeks that followed, I moved with quiet purpose. I leased a modest new apartment through my LLC, safe and warm but not flashy. I established the Second Chances Foundation, funneling resources to single mothers who needed help the way I once had. Anonymous donations began to flow from my trust, targeted toward debts and struggles my family never even knew I saw. To them, it would all look like miracles. Dad's surgery deductible was paid anonymously through a hospital program. Tyler's rehab stay was covered by a mysterious grant. Mom's credit card debt disappeared, written off by an assistance program she never questioned. Madison's life carried on with fewer financial fires, though she never knew why. I gave without recognition, not for their gratitude, but for my own freedom. Each gift highlighted their earlier betrayal, though they would never know it was me. Every debt erased was a reminder of what they hadn't done when I needed them. The satisfaction was sharper than revenge. It was justice cloaked in generosity. They saw miracles where I saw proof. Proof that I didn't need their approval because I was thriving without it. Deborah remained my anchor through it all. Every Thursday, we shared dinner, sometimes soup, sometimes takeout, always conversation. She never asked about the money, never tried to peek behind the curtain of my new stability. We spoke instead about gardens, books, and her shifts at the hotline. With her, I wasn't a lottery winner or a disappointment. I was just Haley. The foundation flourished, helping women rebuild lives stripped bare by betrayal and abandonment. Each success healed wounds I thought were permanent, filling me with a sense of purpose my family never gave me. I watched mothers find safe housing, children receive school supplies, women land jobs they never thought possible. Their gratitude was raw, their relief unfiltered. They were strangers, yet they cared more than my own blood ever had. 6 months slipped by like pages in a book I couldn't put down. My life no longer revolved around waiting for calls from family asking for money or validation. Instead, my days were consumed with building something real, something that mattered, the Second Chances Foundation. Each file on my desk told the story of a woman like me, forgotten until desperation forced her to reach out. Helping them gave me a sense of power I had never felt before, the kind that came from lifting someone else up instead of being pulled down. Despite the distance I'd set, my family's presence still lingered like an echo. Mom called occasionally, always leading with her own problems before half-heartedly asking about me. Dad sent job postings once or twice, as if I were still unemployed. Madison kept posting about her renovation progress, marble backsplashes, and wine tastings, flaunting luxury as if she were competing with invisible rivals. Tyler remained erratic, sometimes texting with meaningless updates, sometimes vanishing for weeks at a time. When Madison turned 30, she insisted on a family dinner at a restaurant that charged more for bread than I used to spend on groceries in a week. I arrived in my new Honda CR-V, nothing extravagant but dependable and mine. My dress was modest but elegant, a quiet symbol of the stability they thought I lacked. Madison's eyes widened when she saw me, her smile faltering before it hardened back into its practiced charm. "You look different," she said, her tone both admiration and suspicion. Dinner unfolded like theater, everyone playing their roles. Mom complimented Madison loudly while ignoring everyone else. Richard boasted about investments, and Tyler barely kept his eyes open. Dad asked pointed questions about my foundation, trying to measure its legitimacy without asking too directly. Madison leaned closer, pressing me about whether I had received an inheritance or settlement. I deflected, smiling politely, as if the question didn't sting. Their curiosity grew sharper with every passing month. When Dad's surgery deductible was miraculously covered, he called me in disbelief. "Someone donated specifically for patients like me," he said, his voice cracking with relief. I congratulated him, swallowing the truth that I had orchestrated it through my trust. He never suspected, and I never corrected him. Let them think miracles still existed. It was easier than telling them miracles had a name. Tyler's spiral finally hit the point of no return that November. He owed the wrong people money, and one night he stumbled home with bruises and stitches, shaken but still trying to pretend he was fine. When he finally agreed to rehab, an anonymous grant covered his full stay. Mom called it divine intervention. And for once, Tyler cried, swearing he would turn his life around. I stayed silent, knowing it was me pulling the strings from the shadows. Mom's crisis erupted a month later, when Richard discovered the $12,000 of hidden credit card debt she had racked up. Their shouting match carried through the phone when she accidentally pocket-dialed me, every accusation echoing with desperation. A day later, she called me sobbing, amazed that her debt had been wiped away by a mysterious program. I murmured sympathetic words, never admitting I had been the one to clear it. Each act of help deepened the divide between what they believed and what I knew. Christmas that year was strange, like dining with strangers who shared my face. They spoke of miracles, debts erased, lives turning around, never once connecting it to me. Madison bragged about her finished kitchen, Tyler announced he was 30 days sober, and Dad toasted his health. Mom called it the luckiest year our family has had in ages. I chewed dry turkey and forced a smile, the irony bitter on my tongue. Only Deborah knew the truth, and she carried it like a shared secret rather than a burden. We met every Thursday for dinner, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. She never asked about the millions or the mechanics of how I pulled off my anonymous interventions. Instead, we spoke of real things: her garden, her shifts at the crisis hotline, the soup recipes she experimented with. With her, I could finally exhale. The house I'd arranged for Deborah through a fabricated housing grant became her sanctuary. She decorated it with secondhand finds, turning it into a home that glowed with comfort and resilience. I visited often, helping her plant roses and prune hedges, enjoying the dirt under my nails as much as the conversations we shared. For once, she could afford her medication in full, her blood sugar levels steady and her energy stronger. Watching her thrive gave me more joy than any luxury item ever could. Meanwhile, the foundation grew. We expanded beyond emergency rent and utilities, adding job training, counseling, and scholarships for single mothers returning to school. My assistant, Karen, had once been one of our clients, and now she managed the office with remarkable precision. Her story reminded me daily why I had chosen this path. She had left an abusive relationship with nothing, and now she was rebuilding her life with dignity. Every success healed a piece of me my family had broken. Each child who got school supplies, each woman who found safe housing, each client who cried in gratitude, each moment was like stitching up an old wound. My foundation became more than a cover for my wealth. It became my life's work. In helping others, I found purpose, and in finding purpose, I finally found myself. Money hadn't saved me. Truth had. January brought another family dinner, and I went, though I debated skipping. Mom cornered me in the kitchen, her tone soft but calculating. "You seem so different, Haley. Happier, more powerful." She lingered on the word, fishing for an answer I wasn't going to give. I smiled politely and told her I had found my purpose. She looked unsettled, as though my peace threatened her narrative of me as the needy sibling. "Do you think we'll ever be close again?" she asked, her eyes darting away. I thought of the food bank suggestion, the marble excuses, the bruises Tyler flaunted while ignoring my calls. "We're as close as we need to be," I answered. Her face fell, but I felt no guilt. The beauty of my quiet revenge wasn't in watching them suffer, it was in watching myself thrive. Every time they wondered how I had survived, I smiled. Every time they speculated about my supposed miracles, I lived more freely. Their confusion was my peace. As March rolled in, so did the anniversary of my winning ticket. I drove to Murphy's Corner store on a sunny afternoon, the bell above the door chiming the same way it had 1 year ago. Mr. Murphy looked up from his crossword and smiled. "Haley? Long time. How's that birthday luck treating you?" he asked warmly. He remembered, as he always did. We sat outside the store with paper cups of coffee, talking about his granddaughter's college acceptance and the new bakery owners next door. The conversation was ordinary, but it felt extraordinary because it had no agenda. He never asked for money, never hinted at favors. He just wanted to share a moment. It struck me then how family could be found anywhere, even on a cracked bench outside a corner store. That losing ticket he handed me that day, I kept in my wallet beside the winning one. framing both in my heart as reminders of where I'd been and where I was going. April brought Mom's 60th birthday, and Madison orchestrated it like a royal event. The celebration was hosted at a country club, all marble floors and white-gloved servers. The kind of place where my thrifted past self would have been out of place. I arrived in the same understated style I'd chosen for months. Professional, neat, but not flashy. My new shoes and modest jewelry blended into the room without revealing their quiet expense. Still, I felt their eyes on me, dissecting every detail like detectives searching for clues. Mom basked in the attention, wearing a gown I knew she couldn't afford without credit. Richard looked tense beside her, jaw clenched as if calculating costs in his head, while she spun fantasies of retirement trips. Madison leaned across the table, confiding to a cousin about how the loans for her renovation were crushing them, though her voice carried loudly enough for me to hear. Tyler tried to stay upbeat, talking about maybe going back to school, though his restless eyes betrayed uncertainty. Dad remained preoccupied with his stock app, glancing up only when others laughed at a joke. When I entered, Mom announced my arrival like a hostess presenting a surprise guest. Heads turned, eyes flickered over my dress, my hair, my watch, every piece cataloged against their mental balance sheets. "You look wonderful," Aunt Jennifer said, though I could count on one hand the number of real conversations we'd shared in my life. "Patricia tells me you're running a foundation now." Her tone was polite, but the curiosity under it was sharp. "Yes," I replied evenly. "We've been able to help quite a few people this year." Their faces tightened with questions they didn't dare ask outright. Was it successful enough to fund this new version of me? Did someone wealthy invest? Did I marry into stability? Each glance across the table was a silent interrogation, and each answer I gave was deliberately vague. As the evening stretched on, the conversation turned predictably back to their own troubles. Madison lamented the cost of private school tuition, dropping hints about sacrifice while swirling wine in a glass that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Dad sighed about needing a new car, but not having the credit for it. Tyler poked at his food, saying little, but I could sense desperation simmering beneath his silence. Mom floated dreams of retiring early, oblivious to Richard's darkened expression. Through it all, not once did they ask if I was happy. I brought a modest gift for Mom. A framed family photo from years ago when smiles had been easier to summon. She accepted it with a faint smile before turning back to her friends to brag about the event itself. Madison opened designer packages, Tyler handed over a gift card, and Richard presented jewelry he probably couldn't afford. My photo sat off to the side, almost forgotten, but I didn't mind. I knew its worth wasn't in her recognition but in my quiet defiance. Charlotte arrived the following weekend. Her red hair shorter now, but her laughter just as bright. We hadn't seen each other in months, yet the moment she walked into my apartment, it felt like no time had passed. She teased me about my upgraded living space, whistling as she ran her hand across the smooth counters. "Look at you living like an adult now," she said, her grin infectious. For the first time in ages, I laughed without holding back. I showed her the foundation's office, letting her meet Karen and see the work we did firsthand. Charlotte's eyes softened as she watched me call a client to tell her rent would be covered. "You're saving lives," she said quietly afterward, her voice heavy with sincerity. That night, she joined Deborah and me for dinner, tasting Deborah's famous pot roast and listening to stories that blended grief with humor. "This is Haley's real family," Deborah told her, and Charlotte nodded in agreement. Later, with glasses of wine in Deborah's garden, I told Charlotte everything. The lottery, the test, the betrayal, the miracles my family mistook as luck. I expected judgment, maybe even shock, but she simply listened, her brow furrowing only when I mentioned my family's cruelties. "You know what's remarkable?" she finally said. "You could destroy them with the truth, but you chose to help them instead." Her words cut straight through me. I shook my head, insisting it was revenge, not grace. I told her how each anonymous act highlighted their failures, how every erased debt reminded me of their neglect. She smiled sadly, sipping her wine. "No, Haley. Revenge is rubbing their faces in it. What you're doing is bigger than that. It's transcendence." Her certainty unsettled me, yet part of me longed to believe her. The next morning, we planted tomatoes and peppers in Deborah's garden, soil staining our hands as birds chirped overhead. Deborah mentioned maybe volunteering as a counselor for the foundation, her eyes glinting with renewed purpose. Charlotte encouraged her, telling her she'd be perfect for it, her lived experience invaluable. For a while, the three of us worked in silence, the kind of silence that was safe and warm. I realized then that these two women were the family I had chosen, not the one I had been born into. Mom's texts began again that spring. Probing messages laced with suspicion. "We're planning a summer trip. Maybe you can contribute since you're doing so well now," she wrote. Another time, she asked if I'd heard about Madison's tuition troubles, adding a winking emoji as if hinting at a solution. I deleted them without replying, the silence more powerful than any argument. Let them wonder. Their confusion was my freedom. By summer, the foundation launched its first scholarship program for single mothers returning to school. Applications flooded in, stories of resilience that mirrored pieces of my own. Deborah became a volunteer, helping women navigate paperwork with her steady voice and patient heart. Karen organized everything with military precision, and soon our small office buzzed with energy and hope. Watching it unfold filled me with a pride I'd never felt at my old job. At one Thursday dinner, Deborah asked softly if my mother ever suspected. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "She's too busy praying for miracles to recognize the source." Charlotte added, "Some people earn the truth, others just stay close to it by accident." We clinked glasses at that, acknowledging silently that we knew the difference. On my dresser at home, I kept two things side by side, the laminated winning ticket and Deborah's worn envelope filled with the memory of her sacrifice. $7 million sat in investments, but that envelope carried more weight than all of it. It was the proof of loyalty, the symbol of choice over blood. I touched it sometimes when doubt crept in, reminding myself of the moment that defined everything. Blood had made me related, but choice had made me family. As fall approached, I found myself less haunted by my siblings' betrayals. Their voices no longer echoed with the same venom. Their excuses no longer pierced my chest. Instead, I focused on the women I helped, on Deborah's laughter, on Charlotte's unwavering friendship. My family still gathered without me, posting polished photos with captions about togetherness. But those snapshots were hollow compared to the messy, real love I had built. The summer trip they planned went ahead, without me, Instagram filled with their smiling faces on Mediterranean beaches. Mom sent one final text with a photo of herself holding a cocktail. "Wish you were here." The irony was so sharp I laughed out loud, deleting the message without hesitation. For once, I felt no sting in being excluded. I had already chosen where I belonged. Before I narrate what happens next, let me know why you haven't subscribed yet. By October, the foundation had grown into something larger than I ever imagined. We'd assisted over 40 single mothers in securing housing, paying utilities, and returning to school. Each story added fuel to my determination, each success a quiet victory over the years my own family had ignored me. Karen thrived in her new role as office manager. Her children settled into safe schools, their drawings taped proudly to our office walls. Watching them rebuild reminded me daily why I kept my secret. Madison's birthday arrived, and the invitation reached me like an afterthought. The dinner was scheduled at an upscale restaurant, with velvet booths and chandeliers that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel inadequate. I considered skipping, but curiosity pulled me in. I wanted to see their faces, to watch them try to solve the puzzle of my life. I arrived in a dress bought from an actual store, tailored to fit instead of thrifted to approximate. Their eyes followed me as if they were inspecting a stranger. "Haley, you look incredible," Madison said, her voice dripping with both surprise and calculation. Mom leaned in close, trying to catch a whiff of perfume, while Richard's gaze slid to the watch on my wrist. Tyler stared at my hands, noticing the neat manicure that no longer screamed desperation. Dad asked about the foundation, prodding gently but with the curiosity of someone searching for cracks in a facade. I smiled, giving only the answers I wanted them to hear. The dinner conversation turned quickly back to them, as it always did. Dad complained about his car finally dying, unsure how he'd manage financing another. Madison dropped hints about tuition costs, spiraling, sighing dramatically. Mom mentioned their credit card interest rates with a tone of martyrdom, ignoring Richard's clenched jaw beside her. Tyler stayed quiet, though I knew from whispers he was still wrestling with debts he hadn't repaid. 2 weeks later, Dad called me in astonishment. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice lighter than I'd heard in years. "The hospital told me some anonymous benefactor covered my deductible. $5,000. Just like that." I congratulated him warmly, my chest tight with satisfaction. He would never know it was me, and that was the point. Tyler's reckoning arrived not long after. He had been cornered by men he owed, beaten badly enough to leave scars. He finally agreed to rehab, desperate enough to surrender. Mom called me sobbing with relief when he was admitted, declaring it nothing short of divine intervention. I sat in silence, knowing it was me who had paid every cent through a community grant they would never trace. Christmas brought its own kind of theater. The family gathered around Mom's dining table, boasting about their blessings, toasting their good fortune, marveling at the string of miracles that had carried them through the year. Madison boasted about her kitchen, Tyler announced his sobriety, and Mom called it the luckiest year our family has had in ages. I chewed dry turkey, nodding politely, biting down on the irony that threatened to escape in laughter. Their blindness was almost a gift. Deborah, as always, remained my anchor. Thursday dinners at her bungalow were my sanctuary, her kitchen filled with warmth and food that carried love in every bite. She decorated the house with thrift finds, each corner a testament to resilience rather than wealth. We tended to her roses together, our hands dirty, our laughter easy. With her, I wasn't Haley, the secret millionaire. I was simply Haley, someone worth loving without condition. The foundation launched its scholarship program in spring, and applications poured in. Women shared stories of survival, of clawing their way out of shadows that threatened to consume them. Deborah volunteered as a counselor, her calm presence guiding them through paperwork and doubt. She told me it gave her life new purpose, and her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in years. Karen managed logistics, ensuring every detail was handled with precision. One night, after a long day of approvals, Karen pulled me aside. "You saved my life," she whispered, emotion cracking her voice. I smiled and shook my head. "You saved your own life. We just helped with logistics." Her tears spilled anyway, and I realized then that my work wasn't just about justice. It was about redemption. Not just for them, but for me. January brought another family dinner, and though I wanted to avoid it, I went. Mom cornered me again, her words laced with careful suspicion. "You seem powerful these days, Haley. Different. What's changed?" I met her gaze steadily and replied, "I found my purpose." She faltered, lips pursed, as if the answer wasn't what she wanted. "Do you think we'll ever be close again?" she asked quietly. I thought of the food bank suggestion, the ignored calls, the marble backsplash that mattered more than me. "We're as close as we need to be," I answered calmly. Her face twisted, but I didn't flinch. Leaving that dinner, I felt lighter than I had in years. Their confusion was its own reward. Their endless questions, a cage I no longer lived in. Each miracle I gave them was a mirror of their past failures, a reflection of the love they never offered me. My silence was the sharpest revenge, because it forced them to wonder. Wonder was heavier than truth. March arrived, marking the anniversary of the winning ticket. I returned to Murphy's corner store, where the bell chimed as if welcoming me home. Mr. Murphy looked up from his crossword, his face lighting with recognition. "Haley, how's that birthday luck treating you?" he asked warmly. He remembered, as he always did. We sat outside on the cracked bench, sipping his terrible coffee that somehow always tasted right. He told me about his granddaughter's scholarship and his grandson's baseball season. We talked about the bakery next door, about the early spring weather, about nothing and everything. He never asked for anything, never wanted more than conversation. In that moment, he felt more like family than anyone with my blood. Later that night, I tucked the losing ticket into my wallet, placing it beside the laminated winner. One reminded me of chance, the other of choice. I planned to frame them side by side, not as symbols of money, but as symbols of transformation. Winning had given me wealth, but losing had given me perspective. Together, they told the whole story of my freedom. The foundation continued to grow, but it wasn't the only thing flourishing. My friendship with Charlotte deepened, her presence grounding me in a way even Deborah couldn't always manage. She called me out when I spiraled, laughed with me when I needed it, and reminded me that I was more than my family's betrayal. With her, my secret felt less heavy, like a story I had shared with someone who understood. Between her and Deborah, I finally felt safe. Mom's 60th birthday had been grand, but her texts afterward grew more desperate. She hinted at financial struggles, suggested I should help, since you're doing so well. Madison joined in, sending photos of tuition bills, her messages dripping with false cheer. Tyler stayed quiet, perhaps too embarrassed to ask after all his failures. But I ignored them all, my silence speaking louder than any denial. Every day, I woke up free from their demands, free from their guilt, free from their manipulation, free from the endless cycle of giving and never receiving. I chose my family now, Deborah with her soup, Charlotte with her laughter, Karen with her resilience. They were the ones who mattered, the ones who showed me love without strings attached. My wealth didn't define me, my choices did. End of part 5 of 10. You said. Continue with the story. The word count should be 1,000 words. Each paragraph must have exactly 5 sentences. Keep all continuity. If a character is a dog, they remain a dog physically and narratively. If someone is a sister, they must remain a sister. Roles like sibling, parent, rival, etc. must stay fixed unless logically changed in the story. If a character didn't do something, they must not act like they did. Characters should not know things they weren't told or didn't see. No silent contradictions of earlier facts. ChatGPT said, Part 6 of 10. Spring melted into summer, and the foundation hit its stride. We had begun partnering with local shelters, offering workshops on budgeting and resume building alongside emergency assistance. Deborah flourished in her volunteer role, guiding women with her quiet empathy, while Karen kept the office running like a machine. For the first time in years, I woke up excited, not dreading another day of being overlooked and drained. My secret sat quietly beneath it all, a hidden engine powering the life I had built. But my family's curiosity never dimmed. Madison sent another text with a picture of her daughter in a private school uniform, adding, quote, "Can you believe tuition is this high?" as if testing the waters. Dad called once to ask if I'd considered getting serious investors for my foundation, the question cloaked in casual interest. Tyler kept silent, though whispers from friends suggested he was barely holding on despite rehab. Mom, meanwhile, doubled down on guilt, leaving voicemails about how stressful it is to worry about you all the time. I didn't answer any of them. Silence had become my sharpest weapon, and I wielded it carefully. They weren't owed explanations, and they weren't owed my presence. Still, I couldn't deny that part of me enjoyed imagining their conversations, speculating about the daughter who had somehow risen while they remained stuck. Their wondering was a cage they had built for themselves. Charlotte visited again in June, this time staying a full week. We toured the city like tourists, laughing in museums and wandering through parks I'd once been too tired to enjoy. She asked careful questions about the foundation, but never about the money itself, respecting the boundaries I needed. "You're thriving," she said one evening over wine, her eyes warm. "I've never seen you glow like this." Deborah hosted us both that Thursday, her garden bursting with summer blooms. She cooked chicken and potatoes, insisting we take seconds, her joy contagious. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, wine glass in hand, and declared, "This is family." Deborah's smile deepened, the lines on her face softening in the candlelight. My chest swelled with gratitude, realizing how profoundly true that simple statement was. By August, the foundation launched its second scholarship cycle, and demand doubled. Stories poured in from women fighting their way out of situations worse than mine had ever been. We couldn't help them all, but each approval felt like a triumph. Deborah often cried quietly after reading applications, her hand brushing mine as if to remind me why this mattered. Together, We were building more than aid. We were building dignity. Yet the family I was born into never stopped testing me, even unknowingly. Madison threw a pool party, posting endless pictures online of catered spreads and luxury floats, captioned with, "Sometimes you just need to relax." Tyler posted less, but his few photos were of sneakers, dinners, and expensive gadgets. Dad remained focused on his career despite nearing retirement, while Mom's texts grew sharper. "We haven't seen you in months, Haley. What are you hiding?" The irony nearly made me laugh. It was around then that Deborah fell ill. Nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue and dizziness that sent her to the doctor. She brushed it off, insisting she'd just overextended herself, but I wasn't convinced. I quietly arranged for her medical bills to be covered through a hospital assistance program, ensuring she never saw a balance she couldn't manage. Her gratitude for the supposed grant made me ache with guilt and love in equal measure. Charlotte noticed my worry before anyone else. "You look like you're carrying something," she said gently one night. I shook my head, insisting it was just stress from the foundation, but she leaned in, her eyes steady, and said, "You don't have to carry everything alone." Her words stayed with me, echoing long after she left for the airport. Trust was hard, even with the people who had earned it. Deborah's test results showed her condition was manageable with proper medication, and relief washed through me. She returned to her volunteering, slower this time, but still steady. "Helping others helps me," she said, brushing off my concerns with a smile. I wanted to tell her that she had already saved me, but the words lodged in my throat. Some truths remained too raw to voice. Meanwhile, the family orchestrated another dinner, this one under the guise of catching up. I debated whether to attend, knowing it would be filled with subtle interrogations. Curiosity won again, and I went, dressed in my usual understated way. The evening unfolded as expected, complaints about bills, speculation about me, and Richard checking his phone every 5 minutes. Madison leaned in with a grin, saying, "You always look so calm these days. What's your secret?" I smiled faintly and replied, "Peace of mind." The answer frustrated them more than if I'd confessed to anything concrete. They exchanged glances, silently calculating, but no one dared push further. When the conversation shifted back to Madison's renovations and Tyler's job hunt, I leaned back, detached. Their noise no longer pierced me. It barely even touched me. Afterward, Mom walked me to the door, her expression carefully composed. "You know, Haley, families are supposed to stick together," she said pointedly. I met her gaze and replied, "Families are supposed to care." Her face tightened, but I didn't linger for a response. The door closing behind me felt like sealing a chapter I'd never reopen. Back at my apartment, I pulled out the laminated ticket and Deborah's envelope, laying them side by side. One represented chance, the other choice. One had given me wealth, but the other had given me clarity. Without Deborah's sacrifice, my millions would have been meaningless. I owed her more than I could ever repay, though she would never demand a cent. Summer ended with the foundation celebrating its first anniversary. We hosted a small gathering, not a gala, just a community event with food, laughter, and testimonials. Mothers stood at the microphone, their voices trembling as they spoke of new apartments, new jobs, and new hope. Deborah clapped until her hands hurt, tears streaming down her cheeks. Karen hugged me afterward, whispering, "This is your legacy." That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars below. My phone buzzed with another message from Mom, asking if I'd consider joining them for Thanksgiving. I didn't answer, letting the message fade into silence. I had no need to sit at their table anymore. I already knew where I belonged. End of part 6 of 10. You said, continue with the story. The word count should be 1,000 words. Each paragraph must have exactly 5 sentences. Keep all continuity. If a character is a dog, they remain a dog physically and narratively. If someone is a sister, they must remain a sister. Roles like sibling, parent, rival, etc. must stay fixed unless logically changed in the story. If a character didn't do something, they must not act like they did. Characters should not know things they weren't told or didn't see. No silent contradictions of earlier facts. ChatGPT said, Part 7 of 10. Thanksgiving crept up faster than I expected, the chill in the air hinting at the weight of family gatherings. Mom's texts grew increasingly insistent, her tone shifting from casual invitations to guilt-laden messages about family tradition. I hadn't attended last year, claiming work obligations, but I knew skipping again would draw attention. Still, I hesitated, wondering if exposing myself to their judgment and questions was worth the cost. Deborah, sensing my unease, suggested gently, "Sometimes, showing up reminds you why you walked away in the first place." I agreed to go, though only for the clarity it would bring me. On the day itself, I drove out to Mom and Richard's sprawling colonial, the driveway already lined with cars I knew were purchased with loans and desperation. Madison's white SUV gleamed next to Tyler's truck, its shine suggesting money he didn't have. I parked my dependable CR-V at the edge, the contrast not lost on me. As I walked in, the smell of roasting turkey wrapped the air, but the warmth felt hollow. "Haley's here," Madison announced, her voice carrying that familiar mix of obligation and disdain. Mom hugged me quickly, already distracted by basting the turkey, while Richard barely looked up from his phone. Dad offered a stiff nod, preoccupied with a sports game playing in the background. Tyler greeted me with a half-smile, the weariness in his eyes betraying his struggles despite sobriety. Deborah, thankfully, was seated at the kitchen table, peeling potatoes with calm grace. Dinner unfolded in its usual lopsided rhythm. Madison boasted about holiday decorations imported from Europe, her words dripping with superiority. Tyler spoke vaguely about job opportunities, though none sounded real. Dad launched into a lecture about fiscal responsibility, as though irony had skipped him entirely. Mom chimed in with passive-aggressive comments about how hard it is to hold this family together. I ate quietly, focusing on Deborah's steady presence beside me. She asked simple questions about the foundation, about my apartment, about whether I'd been eating enough. Her concern cut through the noise like sunlight through clouds. Madison rolled her eyes more than once at our exchange, muttering about how some people love pity conversations. Tyler avoided my gaze, perhaps ashamed or perhaps too exhausted to care. My heart ached, but not from longing, just recognition of the truth. When pie was served, the inevitable interrogation began. Richard leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "So, Haley, you seem to be doing pretty well these days. That foundation of yours must be paying better than we thought." His words carried both suspicion and envy, and the others leaned in subtly, hungry for answers. I met his gaze calmly and replied, "The foundation is going well, yes." The silence afterward was telling. They wanted more, needed more, but I gave them nothing. Madison forced a laugh, saying, "Maybe you should teach us your budgeting secrets," though her tone was sharp. Mom nodded eagerly, piling on with, "Yes, you've really turned things around." I smiled faintly and redirected the conversation back to Deborah, praising her work with the women we served. Their frustration was palpable, though unspoken. The questions lingered in the air like smoke, suffocating but never igniting. I stayed polite but distant, refusing to give them the satisfaction of explanations. When the evening ended, I hugged Deborah tightly, whispering my gratitude for her presence. She patted my cheek, her voice soft. "You handled it perfectly." Driving home that night, I realized how free I felt. Their barbs, their suspicion, their jealousy, it no longer wounded me. Instead, it confirmed what I already knew. I had built a life beyond their reach. My foundation, my chosen family, my peace, they were untouchable. The silence I offered them was more powerful than any speech could ever be. December brought its own set of challenges. The foundation's work doubled during the holidays, women desperate to provide something, anything, for their children. Donations from outside sources began trickling in, impressed by our results. Though none knew the true backbone of our funding, Deborah baked cookies for every client who visited the office, her warmth a gift greater than money. Karen organized toy drives, her children proudly helping wrap presents. It was chaos, but the kind that filled me with purpose. Meanwhile, Mom left me increasingly desperate voicemails about her finances. Richard's business had stumbled, and their lifestyle was catching up with them. She mentioned the stress, how hard it was to manage, how much easier it would be if family helped one another. I deleted each message, the irony heavy in my chest. My help had always been invisible, and that was how it would stay. Christmas was quieter for me. I spent the morning at the foundation, handing out gifts and food baskets, watching children's faces light up with unfiltered joy. Deborah joined me, dressed in a red scarf she'd found at a thrift store, her laughter ringing through the office. That evening I joined her for dinner at her bungalow, the table small but full of love. We clinked glasses of cider, grateful for a family we had chosen, not one we were born into. In January, the family group chat buzzed with talk of resolutions and plans. Madison wanted to lose weight. Tyler vowed to stay sober. Mom promised to travel more. They peppered me with messages, vague compliments about my amazing work, thinly veiled attempts to pry into my finances. I responded sparingly, keeping my words polite but empty. The less I gave them, the more they speculated. One afternoon, Dad called directly. "I don't mean to pry," he began, which of course meant he did. "But have you come into some money? Inheritance, maybe? You seem different." I swallowed a laugh and replied, "No, Dad, just better choices." His pause on the other end told me he didn't believe me, but he had no proof. Tyler reached out in February, his tone more subdued than usual. He admitted rehab had been harder than expected, that he was scared of slipping back. For the first time in years, his words felt honest. I encouraged him, offered resources, but nothing more. He didn't ask for money, and I didn't offer it. Deborah's health wavered again that spring, and I stepped in quietly. I arranged for her medication to be fully covered, ensuring she had what she needed without strain. She protested at first, but I reminded her gently, "You once cut your pills in half for me. Let me do this." Tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "Family, Haley, that's what we are." Her words etched themselves into my heart. By March, the foundation celebrated another milestone. 100 families helped. The office buzzed with energy, success stories pinned to the walls like badges of honor. Women stopped by to thank us, their gratitude raw and humbling. Karen's children drew a banner that read, "Second chances equals hope." Standing beneath it, I felt a joy no amount of money alone could buy. Still, the shadows of my family lingered. They circled me like vultures, never quite satisfied, always wondering. Their silence in the moments that mattered most had revealed everything. Now my silence in return became their burden. It was a balance I no longer needed to justify. End of part 7 of 10. You said, "Continue with the story." The word count should be 1,000 words. Each paragraph must have exactly 5 sentences. Keep all continuity. If a character is a dog, they remain a dog physically and narratively. If someone is a sister, they must remain a sister. Roles like sibling, parent, rival, etc. must stay fixed unless logically changed in the story. If a character didn't do something, they must not act like they did. Characters should not know things they weren't told or didn't see. No silent contradictions of earlier facts. ChatGPT said, Part 8 of 10. Spring stretched into warm days, the kind where even the city seemed to breathe easier. At the foundation, we hosted outdoor events, setting up tables with resources for women who might otherwise feel too ashamed to walk through our doors. Deborah sat at the welcome table, handing out pamphlets with her soft smile, while Karen kept the children busy with games. I watched them both, my chest swelling with pride at the small community we'd created. Each laugh, each hug, each tear shed at those events felt like proof I'd turned pain into purpose. Yet, my family's whispers persisted. Mom sent another text, hinting at how strange it was that I'd never asked for help in so long. Madison posted about how some people get lucky breaks while others work hard, her words vague enough for deniability but sharp enough to cut. Tyler stayed quiet, his sobriety still tentative. but his absence from social media spoke louder than words. Richard's silence was the most telling of all, his pride unwilling to admit how much he speculated. In April, Mom called with a practiced casualness that fooled no one. "We're thinking of selling the house," she said, her voice heavy. "Richard's investments aren't what they used to be. Of course, if family could step in, we wouldn't have to make such drastic changes." I bit back the urge to laugh and answered politely, "I'm sure you'll figure it out." She sighed, disappointed that her fishing had come up empty. That same week, I sat with Deborah on her porch, sipping iced tea in the golden evening light. "They'll never stop circling, will they?" I asked, exhaustion creeping into my voice. She shook her head, her gray hair catching the sun. "They're chasing something they'll never find, Haley, and you've already found what matters." Her words settled over me like a balm. Charlotte visited again in May, her energy as vibrant as ever. She walked through the foundation office, greeting staff and clients like old friends, soaking in the stories of survival. That night, we sat in Deborah's garden, candles flickering, the air rich with the scent of roses. Charlotte leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, they'll never understand how you did it. And that's the point." Deborah nodded in agreement, her eyes glinting with pride. Still, a part of me wrestled with guilt. My family suffered under their own choices while I pulled strings behind the curtain, solving their crises anonymously. Was it grace, as Charlotte insisted, or was it control disguised as kindness? Each anonymous payment was both gift and reminder, tethering me to people I no longer wanted in my life. The question lingered like smoke, impossible to clear completely. June brought Madison's latest spectacle, a charity gala at a hotel ballroom hosted under the guise of community service. She invited me with a flourish, clearly hoping my presence would elevate her image. I considered declining, but curiosity pulled me in once again. I arrived in a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, yet heads still turned. Madison greeted me with a hug just tight enough to sting, whispering, "So glad you could finally join us." The evening played out as expected. Madison basked in compliments, her every gesture calculated for maximum attention. Richard boasted about properties, while Mom floated from table to table, hungry for admiration. Tyler lurked near the bar, sipping sparkling water with a strained smile. Dad cornered me briefly, once again hinting about whether I'd come into something, his tone deceptively light. When the speeches began, Madison thanked everyone profusely for their generosity. She described her gala as a testament to family values, her voice saccharine with false sincerity. My stomach twisted at the irony. This was the same sister who had dismissed me when I begged for help. I clapped politely, though inside I seethed at the charade. Deborah's quiet voice in my head reminded me to breathe. Afterward, Tyler caught me by the exit. His eyes were clearer than I'd seen in years, his voice low. "I know I screwed up before," he said, "but rehab changed me. I want to do better." His honesty startled me, though I simply nodded and said, "Then prove it." July arrived, and with it, the Foundation's second anniversary. We hosted a community fair, complete with food, music, and workshops, drawing in more families than ever before. Deborah beamed as she watched mothers and children dancing, her hand squeezing mine with pride. Charlotte gave a short speech, her words full of warmth, celebrating the lives we'd touched. I stood back, letting their joy eclipse my own secret role in making it all possible. Later that night, I sat at home with the laminated ticket and Deborah's envelope laid out before me. One symbolized chance, the other loyalty, both woven into the fabric of my life. Without Deborah, the millions would have been a burden, not a blessing. She had turned money into meaning by reminding me what family truly was. My eyes blurred with tears as I whispered, "Thank you." August brought storms, both literal and figurative. Heavy rains flooded parts of the city, displacing families who suddenly arrived at our office desperate for shelter and aid. We worked tirelessly, every hand stretched thin, Yet the gratitude of those we helped made the exhaustion bearable. Deborah pushed herself too hard, and I worried as I watched her cough between tasks. "I'm fine," she insisted, but I wasn't convinced. That same week, Mom called again, her voice brittle. "We've hit a rough patch," she confessed, words I never thought I'd hear her say. "Richard's investments collapsed, and we might lose the house." She paused, waiting for me to fill the silence with an offer. I didn't. Instead, I said, "I hope it works out for you," and ended the call before guilt could choke me. Deborah's health forced her to slow down by September. She reduced her volunteering hours, focusing more on rest, though she still insisted on baking cookies for the foundation. I visited often, bringing groceries and keeping her company, grateful for every moment we shared. She never asked about my family, though she knew enough to sense the tension. Instead, she simply reminded me, "Family is who shows up, Haley. Don't forget that." At the end of the month, the family group chat buzzed with news. Mom and Richard had sold the house. The messages dripped with pity for themselves, each relative commenting on how unfair it was. Madison wrote, "It's heartbreaking. They sacrificed so much." Tyler added, "Life just keeps kicking us." I read their words, my silence louder than any reply. In October, I found myself walking through Deborah's garden alone while she napped inside. The roses we had planted together bloomed defiantly despite the cooling air. I touched the petals gently, remembering every Thursday dinner, every laugh, every word of wisdom she'd shared. She was the only one who had ever truly chosen me. And I knew, no matter what, she always would. End of part 8 of 10. You said, "Continue with the story." The word count should be 1,000 words. Each paragraph must have exactly 5 sentences. Keep all continuity. If a character is a dog, they remain a dog physically and narratively. If someone is a sister, they must remain a sister. Roles like sibling, parent, rival, etc. must stay fixed unless logically changed in the story. If a character didn't do something, they must not act like they did. Characters should not know things they weren't told or didn't see. No silent contradictions of earlier facts. ChatGPT said, Part 9 of 10. October faded into November, and Deborah's strength waned further. She admitted reluctantly that even small tasks exhausted her now, her voice trembling with frustration at her own body. I stayed by her side whenever I could, cooking meals and cleaning, while she rested in her chair by the window. She insisted on still attending Thursday dinners, even if the meal was simple soup and bread. "It's not the food," she said with a weak smile. "It's the company." Meanwhile, my family continued their spiral. Mom and Richard had moved into a smaller rental after selling the Colonial, though she pretended it was a temporary arrangement. Madison complained about the embarrassment of her parents downsizing, framing it as an inconvenience to her reputation rather than their hardship. Tyler posted about working odd jobs, clearly scraping to stay afloat. Dad mentioned retirement more often, though his eyes betrayed the fear of having nothing prepared. Thanksgiving loomed again, and the invitations came through the family group chat. Madison added a note about how things are tighter this year, but family matters more than ever. Mom sent me a private message, writing, "Please come, we need to show unity." I debated it for days, knowing it would be another round of veiled questions and silent judgments. In the end, I decided to go, not for them, but to remind myself once more of who they were. When I arrived, the atmosphere was heavy. The meal was simpler than in past years, the table less crowded with luxuries, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Mom plastered on a smile, greeting me as though nothing had changed, while Richard avoided eye contact. Madison talked incessantly about budgeting, as if she were suddenly an expert, though her nails and jewelry told another story. Tyler looked pale, his hands trembling slightly as he passed the rolls. Dinner began quietly, and for a brief moment I thought they might skip their usual probing. But it didn't last. "Haley," Mom said sweetly, "you always look so composed these days. I just wonder, how do you do it? Some of us are barely holding on." Her words hung in the air, bait waiting for me to bite. I met her gaze evenly and replied, peace of mind." Madison scoffed, muttering under her breath about lucky breaks. Dad cleared his throat, asking again if I'd considered seeking investors for the foundation. Tyler said nothing, though his eyes darted between us nervously. I smiled faintly, refusing to elaborate, watching their frustration simmer. After dessert, I slipped outside for air, the cold night sharper than their words. Deborah followed, wrapped in a heavy coat, her breath visible in the chill. She placed a hand on my arm, her grip weaker but steady. "You don't owe them anything, Haley," she whispered. "You've already given more than they ever deserved." Her words stayed with me as the holidays passed. December at the foundation was chaos, but a joyful chaos filled with toy drives, food baskets, and grateful families. Karen's children decorated the office with handmade ornaments, their laughter echoing off the walls. Deborah baked cookies even when she was too tired, insisting that every child deserved sweetness. Watching those families celebrate reminded me again that love didn't come from bloodlines. At Christmas, my family's gathering played out much like Thanksgiving. Mom tried to mask the strain of their downsizing, while Richard drank too much and grew irritable. Madison gushed about the lessons hardship was teaching her, though her tone was self-congratulatory. Tyler admitted quietly that staying sober was a daily battle, his honesty cutting through the noise. I listened, nodding, but offered nothing of myself in return. Instead, I spent the evening of Christmas Day with Deborah. We ate leftovers at her bungalow, the small tree twinkling in the corner. She gave me a knitted scarf she'd worked on in spare moments, the yarn soft against my skin. I gave her a framed photo of the three of us, her, Charlotte, and me, taken at the foundation's anniversary fair. She cried, hugging me tightly, whispering, "This is my family now." January arrived with bitter winds and new challenges. The foundation faced its busiest season yet, requests for aid piling higher than ever. We managed to stretch resources, though I often worked late into the night reviewing applications. Deborah cut back her volunteering further, her health forcing her to rest more. Still, she insisted on attending board meetings, her voice calm and wise as always. One evening, Charlotte called, her tone serious. "Haley, you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. You're helping everyone else, but who's helping you?" I started to deflect, but she cut me off. "Don't you dare say you're fine. I know you, and I can hear it in your voice." Her words pierced through my practiced composure. I admitted then how heavy the secret still felt, how the balance between revenge and grace left me unsettled. Charlotte listened quietly, then said, "Maybe it's not about what you call it. Maybe it's about who you choose to be in spite of it." Her words echoed Deborah's in a new way, reframing my struggle. I realized then that what mattered wasn't the label. It was the life I was building. The past had already judged them. The future was mine to shape. By February, Tyler reached out again, this time with more sincerity. He admitted he'd found a support group that was helping, though he struggled with shame over his past. For once, he didn't ask for money, only advice. "How do you keep going when people expect you to fail?" he asked. I thought for a moment before answering, "By deciding their expectations don't matter." Deborah's health declined further in March, and I knew time was catching up with us. She tired easily, her walks shorter, her voice softer, but her spirit never dimmed. She still asked about the foundation, still reminded me to eat properly, still smiled at every small joy. "Don't be afraid of the future," she told me one evening. "You're already living proof that it can be different." Her words haunted me as I left her house that night. I realized how much she had shaped me, how deeply she had become the mother I never truly had. Without her, my millions would have been nothing but numbers. With her, they became purpose, and with Charlotte beside us, I finally knew what family was supposed to feel like. As spring returned, I stood once more in my apartment, the laminated ticket and Deborah's envelope side by side. One reminded me of luck, the other of love. One had opened a door, the other had given me the courage to walk through it. My family would never know the truth, and that was exactly how it needed to be. Some secrets weren't lies. They were protections, End of part 9 of 10. You said, continue with the story. The word count should be 1,000 words. Each paragraph must have exactly 5 sentences. Keep all continuity. If a character is a dog, they remain a dog physically and narratively. If someone is a sister, they must remain a sister. Roles like sibling, parent, rival, etc. must stay fixed unless logically changed in the story. If a character didn't do something, they must not act like they did. Characters should not know things they weren't told or didn't see. No silent contradictions of earlier facts. ChatGPT said, Part 10 of 10. April arrived with longer days, but Deborah's strength did not return. She moved slower, her steps careful, her breath shorter than before. I found myself visiting almost daily, cooking meals and sitting quietly while she napped in her chair by the window. She never complained, though I could see the frustration in her eyes at being unable to do all she once had. Still, her spirit remained unbroken, her words gentle reminders that love was measured in presence, not performance. The foundation carried on, though I struggled to focus at times. Karen took on more responsibility, managing applications and coordinating volunteers with remarkable dedication. Charlotte visited often, stepping in to help wherever she could, her laughter lifting the heaviness in the air. You don't have to do it all alone, she reminded me more than once, her voice steady. Between her and Deborah, I never felt completely abandoned, even in the hardest moments. One Thursday evening, Deborah insisted on cooking despite my protests. She made her famous chicken soup, though I could see the effort drained her. We ate together at her small kitchen table, steam rising from our bowls. Promise me something, she said suddenly, her eyes sharp despite her frailty. Promise me you'll keep living for yourself, not for what they took from you. I swallowed hard, nodding as tears threatened. I promise, I whispered, the words heavier than any oath I'd ever made. She reached across the table, her thin hand warm against mine. Good, she said, simply. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that stayed with you even after you closed your eyes. May came with blossoms and heartache. Deborah's health declined quickly, and one quiet morning, she passed in her sleep. The call from the hospice nurse shattered me, though I had known it was coming. I sat in her garden that afternoon, surrounded by roses we had planted together, feeling the weight of her absence press down like stone. Yet even in grief, I felt her presence in every bloom, every memory, every word she had left me. The funeral was small, just as she had wanted. A few close friends, neighbors, and the women she had helped through the foundation gathered to say goodbye. Charlotte stood beside me, her hand gripping mine as I struggled to keep from breaking. People shared stories of Deborah's kindness, her tireless service, her steady presence. I realized then how deeply she had impacted lives beyond my own. After the service, I stayed behind in the garden she loved. I held the worn envelope she had once given me, the one filled with her savings, now soft from years of handling. It had become a talisman, proof of loyalty in a world where I had known so little of it. You were my real family, I whispered, my voice breaking, and for the first time in years I let myself sob without restraint. Grief reshaped my days in ways I hadn't expected. Thursday dinners became silent evenings where I cooked Deborah's recipes alone, the smell of soup and bread filling my apartment with echoes of her love. Charlotte stayed close, checking in constantly, refusing to let me retreat too far into solitude. The foundation became my refuge, its clients and successes, a reminder that Deborah's spirit lived on in the work we had built together. Every life we touched was another stone laid on the path she had shown me. Meanwhile, my family continued their pattern. Madison posted about weathering storms with grace, her words hollow beneath staged photos of expensive coffee and designer shoes. Tyler remained quiet, fighting his sobriety one day at a time, though I sensed he was trying harder now. Dad spoke vaguely of retirement again, while Mom left me voicemails about how hard it is to age without support. None of them mentioned Deborah, though she had been there for all of us at some point. The omission cut, but it didn't surprise me. In June, the foundation awarded its largest round of scholarships yet. Women stood at our podium, their voices trembling with gratitude, their children watching with pride. Karen announced the numbers. Dozens of families given stability, hundreds of lives touched. As applause filled the room, I thought of Deborah sitting in her bungalow, knitting quietly, never asking for recognition. She had planted the seed of loyalty in me, and this was the bloom. That night, Charlotte and I sat in my apartment, wine glasses in hand. She studied me for a long moment before saying, "You know, Deborah would be proud of you." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "She gave me everything my family never did," I said softly, "and she never asked for anything in return." Charlotte reached over, squeezing my hand. "That's why she was family. Because she chose you." By July, the whispers from my family had grown quieter. They still speculated, still wondered, but I gave them nothing to feed on. Their silence toward me became habit, their questions unspoken but constant in the background. Occasionally, Mom sent texts hinting at struggles, but I ignored them, knowing she wanted help only if it came with control. They had chosen their paths, and I had chosen mine. One evening in late summer, I visited Murphy's corner store again. The bell chimed as always, and Mr. Murphy looked up from his crossword with a smile. "Haley, it's been a while," he said warmly. We sat outside with cups of his terrible coffee, talking about his grandchildren and the neighborhood. It felt ordinary, and in that ordinariness, it felt sacred. I realized then that family wasn't about grand gestures or obligations. It was about showing up in small ways, consistently, with love and loyalty. Deborah had shown me that, Charlotte reinforced it, and even Mr. Murphy reminded me of it each time he remembered my birthday. The family I'd been born into would never understand, but I no longer needed them to. My life had already outgrown their approval. As autumn approached, I framed the two objects that defined everything, the laminated ticket and Deborah's envelope. They hung side by side in my apartment, reminders of chance and choice. One had given me wealth, but the other had given me clarity. Without Deborah's envelope, the millions would have been meaningless. With it, they became the foundation of a life built on truth. I knew then that my story wasn't about betrayal or revenge. It was about freedom. Freedom from the weight of expectations I never deserved. Freedom from the lies of family who only saw me as a resource. Freedom to choose who I loved, who I trusted, and who I called family. And in that freedom, I finally found peace. Thank you for listening to Haley's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.